In the silent corridors of the imperial harem, a young woman holds a secret powerful enough to shake the foundations of the Ottoman Empire. To survive, Elif has pretended to be mute, hiding both her voice and her tragic past. But when Prince Emir returns to the palace, determined to uncover who poisoned his brother, Elif's silent gaze threatens to expose truths that could endanger power, justice, and a forbidden love. Can a silenced voice face the storm that looms ahead? Let me know in the comments where you're listening to this passionate story from, and tell me, what do you love most about historical romances? Get ready, because this story might just change the way you see love forever. Istanbul, the year 1850. The sky above the Bosphorus awoke shrouded in mist, as if the entire empire were holding its breath. The domes of Topkapi Palace rose solemnly among the cypresses, and behind the high walls of the harem, where time itself seemed suspended, life moved softly in whispers, perfumes, and secrets silenced by duty and fear. Elif walked barefoot across the marble courtyard, her head slightly bowed and her hands gathered at her waist. The hem of her entari, a pale gray linen robe, loosely tied with a faded ribbon, brushed the dew-dampened ground. Slender but modest, she blended into the background among the other women whispering beneath the orange trees. She wore no jewelry, no adornments in her hair. Her eyes, a rare shade of amber, seemed to see everything, yet revealed nothing. And her voice, no one had ever heard it. They called her the Mute, with a mix of pity and disdain. To some, she was a pitiful soul. To others, a spy cloaked in innocence. But the truth Elif harbored ran far deeper than any rumor. It had been 5 years since that night when, barely 20 years old, she had been torn from her home in central Anatolia. Her father, a loyal official of the Sultan, was accused of conspiracy and executed publicly by order of the Divan. Her mother died of grief weeks later, and Elif was handed over to slave traders by the very hands that had once been allies to her family. Her voice broke then, not from illness but by choice. Pretending to be mute was the only way she could stay alive. Inside the harem, she learned to move like the wind, without noise, without trace. Hadisi Kalfa, the eldest servant in the palace, had been the only one to offer her shelter and bread without asking for anything in return. With her, Elif found brief moments of humanity. Hadisi, with her rough hands and stern gaze, knew the girl hid more than silence. But she never asked. Perhaps because she understood that in a place where words could cost a life, silence was wisdom. That morning, however, something different lingered in the air. The rumor spread like incense smoke through the hallways. Prince Emir was returning. The Sultan's eldest son, sent to the Balkans to suppress a rebellion, was coming back after nearly 2 years away. The murmur grew. Some concubines practiced their dances, others adorned their hair with jasmine, hoping to be chosen to greet him. Elif did not change her routine. She continued sweeping the corridors, folding linens in the laundry, and bringing offerings to the small altar where she lit candles in memory of her parents. Despite her silence, she watched the palace staff closely. Something didn't add up. 4 weeks now, young Prince Selim, Emir's younger brother, had shown signs of an inexplicable illness. Low fever, loss of appetite, trembling at dusk. The harem's physician blamed too many sweets. Others, however, had begun to suspect otherwise. That night, as oil lamps flickered in the halls and the distant sound of a ney flute floated through the air, Elif was summoned, along with 5 other concubines, to serve at Prince Emir's welcome dinner. It was the first time in many months that she had been allowed into the reception hall. Her pulse quickened. Not from fear of failure, but from a dark premonition growing inside her like the roots of ivy. From her corner in the room, among bronze trays and porcelain bowls, Elif saw the prince for the first time. Tall, with a solemn bearing and a face hardened by war, Emir did not smile. His gaze was sharp as a blade, and although he showed no interest in female company, every woman in the room followed him with their eyes as if he could grant them heaven. Beside him, Selim laughed with youthful warmth, unaware of the threat surrounding him. Elif noticed a subtle exchange between 2 advisors as the wine was served. A trembling hand, averted eyes. She stored the moment in her memory like a forbidden jewel. And then she felt it, an ancient shiver, a warning that needed no voice. Someone was lying. Someone wanted to kill. That night, upon returning to her room, Elif closed the door quietly, lit a thin candle, and pulled loose a stone behind the tapestry covering her wall. From there, she took out her greatest treasure, a notebook with yellowed pages where she wrote down what she dared not say. With a trembling hand, she recorded every detail she had seen. The ink had not yet dried when a scream echoed through the palace. Prince Selim had collapsed. The once slumbering palace filled with hurried footsteps and alarmed voices. Elif blew out her candle, closed the notebook, and once more became simply the mute, the one no one noticed, the one everyone believed harmless. But in her chest, where secrets ran deeper than the Sea of Marmara, a decision was taking shape in silence. Because some truths, though unspoken, cannot die. And she, though no one knew it yet, would be the only one capable of seeing them, and perhaps one day of giving them voice. The sun descended slowly over Istanbul, bathing the rooftops of Topkapi Palace and the calm waters of the Golden Horn in copper hues. The usual bustle of the harem had been replaced by a near-sacred tension. Servants rushed back and forth carrying freshly pressed silks, pitchers of rose water, trays of candied dates, and bowls of toasted almonds. That night, the entire palace seemed to breathe in rhythm with a single event, the welcome dinner for Prince Emir. The news had spread like hot oil. The legitimate heir was returning after nearly 2 years on campaign. The Imperial Council had arranged an official dinner to mark his return, but what truly stirred the palace corridors was that it would take place in the inner garden wing, where the harem had direct presence. It was rare, almost unheard of, for concubines to be allowed to participate, even if only as servers. But the Sultan, perhaps moved by nostalgia or the desire to impress his eldest son, had authorized a small delegation of women to attend the evening. Among those selected, against all expectation, was Elif. The appointment sparked whispers, furrowed brows, and poisoned glances. Not because she posed any visible threat, but precisely because she didn't. No one understood why a mute, a shadow without voice or ambition, had been chosen. Some suspected old Hadisi had intervened in secret. Others murmured that the Sultan felt pity for her. But the truth, as with most things in the palace, remained buried beneath layers of silence. Elif received the order without flinching. She nodded with a slight bow of her head and returned to her chamber, where Hadisi was waiting with a clean tunic, a wooden comb, and a vial of lavender perfume. Not a word passed between them. None was needed. The elder woman's gaze alone was enough to warn her to be cautious. That afternoon, as the sky turned a shade of mauve and the mosque's call to prayer echoed for the final time that day, Elif prepared herself. Her tunic was a deep green, embroidered with aged gold thread at the collar and cuffs. She wore no jewelry as was customary for harem servants, but her hair was neatly pinned, and her hands, soft as silk, held the tray with the steady grace of someone long accustomed to bearing the weight of fear. The hall prepared for the dinner had been decorated with dazzling restraint. Persian rugs covered the floor, chandeliers hung from tall arches, and in the center of the room stood an ebony table set with porcelain dishes, bohemian crystal goblets, and floral arrangements of fresh jasmine. The oil lamps cast an amber light, warm and deceiving, wrapping the evening in a veil of harmony. Prince Emir was the last to enter. He wore a navy blue redingote with gold detailing, fitted to his frame, and a scarlet sash that marked his rank. His hair was pulled back and his face, though composed, bore the wear of campaigns. He offered no grand greeting, just a nod to his father before taking his seat to the Sultan's right. At his side, Prince Selim radiated joy. His youthful face glowed with excitement as he spoke animatedly about small changes in the palace, the renewed gardens, the new fountains in the central courtyard. His voice was music to those who loved him, but to Elif, watching from the shadows, there was an imperceptible tremor in his tone. Something fragile. The trays began to circulate. Elif moved among the guests with measured steps, avoiding direct eye contact, yet observing everything. From her corner, she noticed details others missed. A cupbearer whose hands trembled slightly as he poured the wine, a counselor who leaned in too closely when speaking with Halil Pasha, a new maid who fumbled a dish but received no reprimand. The dinner unfolded amid restrained laughter and carefully crafted remarks. The Sultan appeared more tired than usual, though still imposing. Emir spoke little, ate even less. He seemed more interested in studying the faces around him than in the delicacies before him. His gaze met Elif's fleetingly as she served him a bowl of spiced soup. It was only a moment, but enough to send a pang through her stomach, as if this man could see beyond the veil of her silence. Selim drank a cup of sweet wine and smiled. He spoke to Halil Pasha about an upcoming equestrian tournament, and the vizier responded in his oily, measured voice. Nothing in his tone would have seemed suspicious to the average ear, but Elif, trained by pain, knew something was wrong. Her heart began to race. She swallowed hard, wishing she had the courage to speak, but she knew she couldn't. Not without proof. Not without protection. And it wasn't time yet. When the dinner concluded, The women withdrew with the same discretion with which they had entered. Elif walked down the corridor back to the harem with trembling arms, as if still carrying the weight of the tray. Hadisi awaited her in their room with a cup of warm milk. Upon seeing her, she asked nothing. She simply sat her down by the brazier and stroked her hair. The peace was short-lived. Later that same night, just past midnight, a scream shattered the palace's quiet. The sound of hurried footsteps, doors flinging open, overlapping voices. Prince Selim had collapsed in his chambers, convulsing with cold sweats and spasms. The Sultan's physician was summoned at once. The news spread like wildfire. The Sultan himself rushed to his son's bedside, followed by Halil Pasha and the council members. Elif, from the high gallery, watched with a clenched heart. Selim's face was contorted, his skin pale, his lips violet. Amir, kneeling beside the bed, gripped his hand tightly, wordless, motionless, as if his mere presence could keep him alive. Hours later, as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the stained glass windows, the physician announced that Selim was alive, but his condition was critical. He had suffered severe poisoning, though the source remained uncertain. The Sultan, his face twisted in anguish, ordered a discreet investigation. He didn't want scandal. Not now. Not with Amir back. Amir said nothing. He rose from his brother's side and left the chamber with firm steps. His eyes, once composed with military discipline, now burned with restrained fury. He didn't need orders to begin his search. From that moment on, he looked at everyone with different eyes. Before morning fully broke and while the palace was still catching its breath, Elif wrote a single sentence in her notebook, her handwriting trembling. The poison is already inside. But the murderer still smiles. Then she closed the notebook, hid it behind the tapestry and sat on the floor, hugging her knees. Silence was not only her refuge. It was also her sentence. But that night, for the first time in many years, she wished that someone with power, might hear what she still dared not say. The dim light of dawn had not yet fully lifted when the bells of the West Tower rang with a grave, deliberate tone. News of Prince Selim's sudden illness had spread through the palace with the swiftness of a cold gust of wind. The corridors, usually quiet at that hour, were now flooded with the hurried steps of messengers, physicians, and eunuchs. Every footfall echoed off the walls with restrained urgency, as if the very building struggled to breathe. In the harem, the women whispered behind curtains and columns, some gripped by fear, others by opportunity. The illness of a prince could mean a shift in the hierarchy, a rise for some, a fall for others. Eyes crossed like sheathed daggers. The younger ones clung to their amulets. The older ones kept a thick silence, waiting to see which way the wind of power would blow. Elif said nothing. Not by order but by choice. Whenever danger seemed to float in the air, she retreated within herself, invisible, almost incorporeal. That morning, after her shift in the kitchen, she returned to her chamber without a single gesture. She moved with the light step of someone who knows every shadow of the palace and how to pass through them without leaving a trace. Once alone, she pulled back the small embroidered tapestry hanging on the north wall of her room. Behind a loose stone, wrapped in a piece of linen, lay her only refuge, a leather-bound notebook worn by time and moisture. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. She sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, and lit a candle. The flame wavered as if unsure of itself, casting long shadows on the walls. Elif dipped her pen into the inkwell and began to write. Not complete sentences nor organized accounts. They were fragments of reality, traces of what she had seen, heard, or sensed. Names recorded in silence. Glances that failed to meet. Goblets exchanged without cause. The overly calm smile of Vizier Halil. The tightness in the shoulders of the cupbearer. The new maid who never reappeared after the dinner. Her handwriting, fine and precise, flowed over the paper with a mix of urgency and pain. That notebook was her only voice, the one place where she allowed herself the truth. She closed it carefully, wrapped it again in linen, and returned it to its hiding place with the tenderness one gives a relic. She knew the notebook could either save her, or condemn her. Meanwhile, in the eastern wing of the palace, Prince Amir remained standing beside his brother's bed. Selim's pale, trembling body lay beneath silk-embroidered sheets, his face beaded with sweat, his lips dry as withered petals. The physicians came and went, murmuring uncertain diagnoses and recommending remedies that had no effect. The Sultan had ordered the matter kept quiet, but Amir could no longer contain the silent fury growing in his chest. He felt powerless, not only because of Selim's illness, but because of the certainty that something dark moved through the palace halls. Poison did not appear by accident. Someone had sought to harm the prince and had succeeded. What Amir could not understand was why. Selim was no threat to anyone. He was kind, generous, even naive. Who would benefit from his death? The prince began to move through the palace with a hawk's gaze. He asked for the names of everyone who had worked that night, requested the kitchen logs, spoke with the guards at the rear entrance, questioned the scribes, the cupbearers, even the gardeners. He trusted neither the council nor Halil Pasha. He needed to see for himself. He needed to see with the eyes of the heart, not through the rehearsed stories everyone repeated. And so it was that, for the first time, his gaze met Elif's. She was leaving the orange grove, carrying an empty tray. Amir was coming from the archives, his brow furrowed, his lips tight. As they crossed paths, Elif lowered her eyes softly as protocol dictated, but not before her amber gaze briefly met his. Just a second. A flicker. But it was enough. Amir stopped. He didn't know her. Or so he thought. But something in her presence unsettled him. A restrained energy. An old sadness. He couldn't explain why, but for several seconds he stood watching her walk away. Her steps were calm, almost ethereal. She didn't move like the others. And that intrigued him. Soon after, tension swept through the harem when the sultan's favorite, Safai, burst into the main hall with a bold accusation. It was her, she declared, pointing a jeweled finger at Elif. The mute one. She served the wine. I saw her. She switched the goblets. Silence fell like a slab of stone. Hadisi Kalfa stood at once, placing herself between Elif and the accuser. Her eyes blazed with indignation. I will not allow a woman's name to be defiled without proof, she said firmly. Elif said nothing, but her breathing quickened, her cheeks flushed red. Not from guilt, but from shame. She was not used to being the center of attention, much less under suspicion. The rumor spread quickly. Safai's accusation had more to do with jealousy than certainty, but in the palace, a poisoned word was enough to destroy a life. Amir, upon hearing of the incident, did not intervene right away. He watched from afar. He wanted to see how others reacted. And most of all, how she reacted. Elif was removed from her duties for the rest of the day. She was barred from entering the kitchen and assigned to washing linens, one of the harshest tasks. Still, she did not protest. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply obeyed with her usual serenity, as if carrying the burden of silence on her shoulders was a fate she had long accepted. That night, upon returning to her room, Elif did not light the candle. She sat in the darkness, legs crossed, and listened to the sounds of the palace. The distant footsteps of guards, the creaking of wood, the whisper of the wind. She closed her eyes and pressed her lips together. Fear tried to rise in her chest, but she wouldn't let it. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. Inside her, a promise began to take shape. She would not let the voice of injustice bury her. Not this time. And though no one knew it yet, the notebook hidden behind the tapestry, that silent, forgotten object, would become the key to changing everyone's fate. The rain had begun at dawn. Fine, persistent drops tapped against the stained glass windows of the harem, as if the sky, too, had chosen to weep. The atmosphere in Topkapi Palace had grown heavy, thick with omens that not even incense could dispel. The maidservants walked on tiptoe. The concubines whispered behind lattice screens. And everyone's gaze shifted at the passing of Elif, though no one dared to speak her name aloud. In the damp silence of the Dove courtyard, Hadisi Kalfa waited, wrapped in her dark woolen cloak. The woman who had served 3 generations of imperial women with unwavering loyalty now held a steady posture, though her eyes were tense. She knew Prince Amir had summoned her, and she also knew this was no ordinary favor. When the guard escorted her to the heir's private chamber, Hadisi lowered her gaze in respect. Amir stood beside a marble column, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression as severe as that of a judge. The rain drummed on the roof above them, setting the rhythm of a tension that could be felt in the air. Hadisi Kalfa, he said without preamble. I need answers. She bowed with dignity, neither fearful nor submissive. I am at your service, Highness. I want to know who the girl they call Mute really is. I'm not interested in appearances but in what she hides. Hadisi took a deep breath. Her weathered face, lined with time and loyalty, did not flinch. Her name is Elif. She was brought to the palace 5 winters ago. She came from Anatolia. No one requested her. No one expected her. But she survived. And here that alone says a great deal. Amir didn't reply immediately. He turned toward a carved wooden table, where a silver tray with untouched goblets rested. Slowly he picked one up and held it between his fingers without drinking. Why doesn't she speak? Hadissi lifted her gaze, meeting the prince's eyes for the first time. Because she learned that in this world, speaking is more dangerous than silence. She is not ill, Highness. She's not a fool. She's simply chosen not to trust anyone. And believe me, I don't blame her. The silence that followed spoke louder than words. Amir set the goblet back on the table, untouched, and walked slowly to the window. His upright posture, his controlled steps, betrayed the inner turmoil that consumed him. I want to see her, he said at last. Not as just another shadow. I want her to serve in my quarters. I need to observe her closely. Hadissi blanched slightly. I beg you, my lord. That young woman is not ready to face such a test. She carries fear etched into her very bones. Precisely for that reason, Amir replied without turning around. Because if what you suggest is true, that young woman knows things that could save my brother. And I have no time for delicacy. Resigned, Hadissi lowered her head. She knew she couldn't refuse. She also knew she was sending Elif to the edge of an abyss. Hours later, 2 eunuchs from the prince's household appeared in the harem corridors. They brought a new tunic, more sober than luxurious, and an order signed by Amir himself. Elif was summoned to the center of the courtyard. The women stopped moving as she passed. Some feigned indifference. Others barely concealed their envy, masked as ridicule. But none dared stop her. Elif accepted the tunic without a word. Hadissi, her eyes misty, fastened the belt with trembling hands. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary on the buttons at the collar. Don't be afraid, she whispered closely. Just listen. Watch. And if you can, keep silent. Elif nodded, though her soul was screaming. She knew this reassignment was no reward, it was a sentence wrapped in silk. Her world, until then confined to the hidden corners of the harem, was now being opened to the gaze of the most feared man in the palace. Upon arriving at the prince's quarters, she was led to a secondary chamber, decorated with masculine austerity. Dark rugs covered the floor. Heavy velvet drapes hung from the windows, and the oil lamps cast a golden glow that did little to warm the coldness of the space. A desk crowded with documents stood at the center of the room. Elif recognized maps, seals, official scripts. Amir was not yet present. Elif stood by the wall, her hands folded over her abdomen, not daring to move. When the prince entered, she immediately lowered her gaze. He said nothing for several minutes. He walked to the table, picked up a letter, and began to read it. But his attention never left her. He felt her. He studied her. There was something in this woman that defied explanation. A mixture of fragility and restraint, like a storm that refused to break. Can you read? He asked without raising his voice. Elif did not answer. She merely shook her head slowly. Amir gave a faint, ironic smile. I don't believe you. He stepped closer. Elif felt the warmth of his presence without lifting her eyes. There was something in him that commanded respect without needing to speak loudly. His proximity was a blade that brushed the skin without wounding. You may fool others, but not me, he continued. I've spent years surrounded by traitors. I know when someone is lying. Elif remained still, but her fingers curled tighter. Her breath shortened. Amir noticed. He needed no further proof. This young woman was not mute. She was protecting herself. He did not speak to her again that day. He allowed her to retreat to a small adjoining room, where she would sleep under supervision. But before leaving, he looked at her once more, a long, weighty gaze that needed no words. In another wing of the palace, Halil Pasha was meeting with the Sultan in the throne room. His robes were dark, but his voice was syrupy. He insisted that Selim's condition be handled discreetly. That rumors of poisoning would only feed instability. That it was better to close the investigation and trust the medical diagnosis. The Sultan, weary, nodded without conviction. Halil left the chamber at a slow pace, but as he turned down the corridor, triumph gleamed in his eyes. Minutes later, alone in his study, Halil opened a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. He drew out an old roll of sealed documents. Among them was the name of a man executed years ago for treason, Bekir Yilmaz, former imperial official. He smiled. No one remembered that name. No one, except his daughter. The same girl now serving in the heir's quarters. The morning broke heavy with dense humidity, as if the entire city were holding its breath. From the terrace of the prince's quarters, the leaden waters of the Bosphorus could be seen, motionless beneath a clouded sky. Not even the seagulls dared to break the silence. Inside the palace, everything moved slowly as if time itself were measuring each step with caution. In Amir's study, the light entered timidly through the muted stained glass. The prince sat at his desk, reviewing official documents, diplomatic letters, and the latest reports on his brother's condition. His brow remained furrowed, his jaw clenched, as if every written word confirmed a truth he refused to accept. Behind him, on a divan draped in dark brocade, lay a tray with the remains of breakfast and a carefully folded napkin. Amir ignored it. He had spent most of the night awake, tormented by thoughts he could not organize. The image of the mute girl, the one with the deep gaze who now served in his quarters, returned to him over and over without permission. It was impossible not to remember her. The way she moved, her quiet obedience, the way her eyes fell upon everything with a focus that went beyond the mere duties of a servant. There was something about her that didn't quite fit. Amir, long trained to spot lies beneath courtly smiles, knew the greatest truth about that young woman lay precisely in what she chose not to say. Then something caught his eye. A small folded piece of paper peeked out from between the brocade cushions on the divan. It hadn't been there the night before. He approached slowly, sensing he was about to uncover something important, and took the paper in his hands. It was a loose sheet, folded in half, with a rough texture and slightly frayed edges. He opened it. The words, written in black ink and careful script, were aligned with precision, as though penned by someone who valued order in even the smallest detail. It wasn't a letter, nor a prayer. They were brief, disconnected phrases. Observations. Banquet night. Cupbearer switched goblet in front of the vizier. Blonde maid entered the pantry twice. New guards in the east wing. A chill ran down Amir's spine. This could not be a coincidence. Someone inside the palace had been watching. And what disturbed him most was that the handwriting did not belong to any scribe he knew. It was a woman's hand. He looked at the paper again. No signature. No further clues. But a suspicion lit up in his mind like a spark igniting in the dark. Belief. He remembered how she had served that night at the banquet. He remembered her eyes fixed on the room's every movement. Her calculated stillness. And above all, he recalled the note he'd found on his desk the day before. At the time, he'd thought it was a stray scrap left by a careless servant. But now, with this new evidence in hand, everything began to fall into place with unsettling clarity. He rose and walked purposefully down the corridor. Elif's quarters were at the far end of the wing reserved for her service. He knocked once, didn't wait for an answer, and entered. She was kneeling beside the brazier, carefully tending the fire. She wore a modest gray linen tunic, her hair tied back in a low knot that left the line of her neck exposed. Upon seeing him, she stood immediately, lowering her gaze respectfully. She made no move to speak. Her face was serene, unstartled. Amir closed the door behind him. He walked toward her, the paper in hand. He held it out between them, wordless. Elif slowly raised her eyes. Her gaze landed on the sheet. Her pupils dilated for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible. But Amir noticed. "Do you recognize this handwriting?" he asked in a grave tone. Elif didn't reply. "I found it in my chambers. It doesn't belong to any of my scribes. And I doubt the guards are taking notes on the banquet." She remained silent, but her lips quivered slightly. Amir took a step closer, closing the distance between them. The firelight from the brazier danced across their faces in a soft, flickering glow. "You're not mute," he said then in a low but firm voice. "Are you?" Elif lowered her head. She neither nodded nor denied it. She simply stood still, like a statue of flesh and bone, like a flower closing against the cold. "I've seen the eyes of those who carry secrets," Amir continued. "I've seen them on the battlefield, in embassies, in the council chambers. But in you, there's something more. It's not fear. It's intelligence. It's memory." Elif pressed her lips together. Her breathing grew uneven. Her hands, which had remained calmly folded, began to tense. Amir tucked the paper inside his kaftan and studied her closely. "I won't report you," he murmured. "Not yet." He turned to leave, but before reaching the door he paused. "If you decide to speak, speak to me. If you don't, I'll keep watching you. And believe me, I know how to wait." He left without looking back. Elif remained frozen, her heart pounding against her chest like a war drum. The page she thought was safe had been discovered. Her secret world was beginning to unravel. But that wasn't what unsettled her most. It was Amir's gaze. There had been something dangerous in it, authority mixed with compassion. Sternness tempered by something deeper, more intimate, that she didn't know how to name. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't humiliated her. He had simply confronted her, as though her silence, for the first time, meant something more than suspicion. That night, once the palace had fallen asleep, Elif returned to her hiding place. She pulled out the notebook. held it in her hands with reverence. She knew that every word written inside it was a double-edged sword. But she also knew that in a place where voices were twisted and manipulated, the only path to truth was to keep writing. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside the palace, the prince had begun to see, and a leaf to be seen. The chill of dawn slipped between the marble columns of Topkapi Palace like an inescapable omen. The air was still, no birdsong, no rustling leaves. Even the Bosphorus seemed to hold its silence, as if it knew this day would not begin like any other. In the royal chamber, Prince Selim's body lay motionless atop a bed of sheets embroidered with golden thread. His skin, once radiant with youth, had turned ashen, and his lips, now pale, no longer uttered the sweet words that had made him beloved. Around the bed, the physicians stood in solemn formation. The silence was absolute. It was the Grand Vizier Halil who lowered his head and spoke the sentence. The prince was dead. The news sliced through the palace walls like an invisible dagger. A muffled cry rang out from the northern gallery. The concubines veiled their faces in mourning, and the maids lit oil lamps in solemn tribute. Amir did not cry. He remained by his brother's corpse, standing still, his face carved into an expression that left no room for comfort. His fists were clenched, trembling ever so slightly. He had loved Selim with the quiet devotion only shared by brothers who grew up side by side. And now the loss was not only a personal wound, it was a warning. Elif, standing in the threshold of the inner corridors, watched the scene with eyes veiled in sorrow. She had served the young prince on more than one occasion. She knew his gentleness, his simple goodness, and the tenderness with which he treated even the humblest of servants. Though her position in the palace afforded her no right to mourn, her soul bled silently. When the body was taken to the ablution chamber, Elif slipped away through a side passage, disobeying the servant's instructions. Unseen, she made her way to the private gardens where Selim's grave was being prepared. Among magnolias and cypresses, a mound of fresh earth marked the place of farewell. With her face hidden beneath the veil of modesty, Elif let fall a single white flower onto the still damp marble and withdrew without a word. She did not know that Amir had seen her. From a concealed archway among the trees, the prince watched her. Her presence there, silent, unaccompanied, without honors or recognition, moved him in a way he hadn't expected. He didn't entirely understand why, but that woman, mute, invisible, had become a constant presence in his thoughts. Painfully constant. That very afternoon, Amir locked himself in his library. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when he already had a map of the palace spread before him. Blueprints of the harem, the kitchen stores, the pantries, and most importantly, the imperial apothecary. He reviewed the logs of items taken and returned. He traced supply routes. He questioned stewards, scribes, and guards. And there, on the third inventory page from the previous month, he found it. A vial of black sumac, harmless in appearance but deadly when mixed with hot wine, had been withdrawn 3 days before the banquet. It had been requested by a servant from the harem. An older woman. Her name was there, written in formal calligraphy with the apothecary's approval seal. Hadisi Kalfa. Amir's heart froze for a moment. He couldn't believe it. That woman, who seemed made of stone and duty, could she have been involved? He ordered that she be brought to him at once, but without alerting the council or the sultan. The meeting was to take place in absolute privacy. Hadisi was brought to the prince's quarters at nightfall. She wore no jewelry, no adornments. Her tunic, dark and simple, was clean. Her face showed a disarming calm. Amir received her alone, with the records spread out on the table and a single candle lit as the only witness. "Do you recognize your name?" he asked bluntly. Hadisi approached, read carefully, and nodded. "Yes, Highness. I requested that vial." "For what purpose?" "To prepare a salve. One of the cooks suffered burns. Black sumac helps soothe the pain. But there's no record of medical use. No one in the kitchen confirmed it. And the vial was never returned." Hadisi held his gaze, unblinking. "Perhaps someone took it from my things without my noticing." "Oh." She said nothing. Amir stood abruptly. He walked toward her with firm steps, stopping barely a hand's breadth from her face. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I do not tolerate lies." Hadisi looked at him as a mother looks at a child who still does not understand the world. "I'm not lying, Highness, but I will say no more. An innocent has already died. I will not let another head fall for the sin of seeking justice." Amir stepped back. Something in her words shook him. "Who are you protecting?" She gave no reply. "Is it a leaf?" Her eyes betrayed her. Just a flicker. But enough. The prince clenched his fists. Her. Hadisi lowered her head. Then in a serene voice she said, "She is only a girl who has suffered too much. She doesn't deserve to bear the weight of a guilt that is not hers. If you need someone to blame, take me." And she stood there, dignified, as one who has chosen to accept her fate without asking for mercy. That night, Hadisi was arrested in secret. No word reached the council. No concubine knew. Only Elif, waiting in her small quarters, noticed her absence. The next day she asked after her, and received no reply. She understood without words what had happened. She walked to the far end of the courtyard, where a solitary palm cast its shadow against the harem walls. There she sat down. And for the first time in many years she felt that silence was no longer enough to protect her. A surge of helplessness rose within her. A mute rage burned in her chest. Somewhere in the palace, Amir stood on his terrace, staring at the night sky. The wind blew from the sea, carrying the salty scent and the whisper of a truth he had yet to name. Hadisi had lied to protect her, he knew that. And that lie came at a price he had himself imposed. But what he still didn't understand was why the suffering of that mute girl had begun to pain him more than his own blood. And why her silence now seemed more eloquent than any scream. The moon, high and solitary above the rooftops of Topkapi Palace, cast its silvery light across the inner courtyards and silent corridors. It was a quiet night, but not a peaceful one. In the hearts of those who lived within the palace walls, there was a heavy, invisible weight, a tension that had lingered like a stubborn mist since the death of Prince Selim. No instruments played in the halls, no dance brought joy to the gardens. Mourning hung in every corner. Deep within the northern wing, behind an iron door hidden behind tapestries, Hadisi Kalfa remained imprisoned. Her cell was small, with damp walls and a single oil lamp casting flickering shadows on the floor. No one questioned her. No one visited. It was as if her existence had been erased from the palace. And yet, her silence echoed in Elif's mind like a persistent whisper. The young woman had taken refuge in her room, wrapped in an anguish for which there was no escape. Since Hadisi had disappeared, her already fragile world had become unbearable. The other servants avoided her gaze. The concubines whispered behind her back. And Amir watched her more closely with each passing day, as if he no longer saw her as just another shadow, but as a living piece of a dangerous puzzle. The night everything changed came without warning. Elif was in the side chamber of the prince's quarters, organizing the documents he had left scattered on a low table. She handled them with care as though each sheet were a sacred object. Her fingers, long used to silence, moved over the edges of the papers with precision. She didn't realize Amir had entered the room until she sensed him behind her, barely breathing. She straightened immediately and lowered her head. Her body, taut as a drawn string, remained still. "There's no need to hide," he said firmly though without harshness. "I already know who you are." Elif didn't respond. Nor did she raise her gaze. Amir walked around the table, circling her, until he stood before her. His eyes studied her, not with suspicion, but with a mixture of fascination and caution. He had spent days thinking about this girl everyone believed to be mute, but he could no longer see her that way. He knew she was pretending. He knew something deep within her forced her to remain silent. "Hadisi is imprisoned for protecting you," he added softly. "And still you say nothing." Elif's breathing quickened. Her lips parted slightly. Amir noticed. "Is your silence worth that much?" He pressed. "Who do you fear more than me?" Elif raised her eyes. Her gaze, golden like autumn, met his with an intensity that left him disarmed. It was a long look, filled with wounds, with unspoken questions, with secrets that had never been confessed. And then, as though something inside her had broken, she stepped closer to him. "It took only one word," she whispered. "Just one." Elif's voice, fragile and trembling, was barely louder than the crackle of the brazier, but to Amir it sounded like a shout. It was the first time he heard her speak. A warm voice, tinged with a subtle Anatolian accent, carrying the sorrow of years spent in silence. The prince stood still. His face hardened, not out of anger but from something deeper. From astonishment. From guilt. From the realization that this young woman, as silent as she was strong, had crossed an irreversible line. Elif immediately lowered her gaze. Her body trembled. Not from fear of him, but because she had broken a promise to herself. Amir took a step back. His breath now came unevenly, and his pulse raced without clear reason. "I will say nothing," he murmured, regaining control. "You're safe." He turned to leave, but before reaching the door, she extended her hand with something between her fingers. It was a folded sheet of paper, written in the same precise handwriting he already recognized. Amir took it without a word. He tucked it inside his tunic and walked away, his thoughts more tangled than ever. When he was alone in his study, he unfolded the paper beneath the light of an oil lamp. The parchment crackled as it opened. There, written clearly, was a name, Halil Pasha, and beneath it, a line. He was the one who condemned my father. Amir closed his eyes. His heart pounded. For the first time he could see with clarity the lines of a deeper web. Salim's poisoning had not been an isolated event. It was the culmination of a scheme woven with patience, ambition, and blood. But beyond politics, beyond the crime itself, what shook him most was Elif. This young woman who for years had hidden behind silence, now offered him a piece of herself. A fragment of truth. A gesture of trust he wasn't sure he deserved. Amir rose and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to clear. The clouds parted slowly, letting the cold glimmer of stars shine through. He knew he could not act just yet. The council still answered to Halil. The Sultan, aged and frail, was too vulnerable to the vizier's sweet words. Amir needed a plan. One that would not only dismantle the conspiracy, but also protect Elif from the consequences. Because though he hadn't said it aloud, something inside him had begun to change. He no longer looked at her as a servant. It was something else now. A silent bond, forged in the shadows, growing without permission. And it had all begun with a whisper. Night had fallen with a heavy silence over the courtyards of Topkapi Palace. The sky, clear and vast, glittered with stars that seemed to watch from above, bearing silent witness to the intrigues woven beneath their immortal gaze. The inner corridors were asleep, the servants retired, and the distant scent of jasmine perfumed the gardens, where only the brave or those unafraid to die dared to speak the truth. Elif walked among the myrtle bushes with measured steps. Her light linen tunic barely stirred in the night breeze, and her hair, loose for the first time, fell over her shoulders like a soft curtain. She was not supposed to be there. Her presence at that hour in the royal gardens could cost her life. But the weight of what she knew, of what she had kept in silence for years, no longer fit within her chest. By the lotus pond she found him. Amir was waiting, standing with his hands behind his back, his face bathed in the moon's white light. He had ordered that no one follow him, that no guards patrol the inner paths. He wanted to see her without witnesses, without protocol, without the walls that protected as much as they confined. When Elif stopped before him, she lowered her gaze as she always did. But Amir did not ask her to speak. He simply watched her for a long moment, one stripped of titles or rank, where only two souls remained, marked by what they knew and what they could not name. "Speak," he said at last, his voice low. "This time, I won't forbid it." Elif slowly raised her eyes. The moonlight glowed on her fair skin, giving her an almost ethereal sheen. She stepped forward once, then again, until only inches separated them. Then, in a whisper barely louder than breath, she began to speak. "I've heard everything," she said. "For years, Halil Pasha didn't just betray my father. He has manipulated every corner of the palace. He's bribed doctors, cooks, scribes. He's made people disappear. At first, I didn't understand. I was too young. But over time, I started piecing it together." Her voice was steady, though trembling with emotion. Amir did not interrupt. His eyes followed her with a restrained intensity. "He was the one who sent the false orders that condemned my father. He forged seals, invented enemies. And then, he made sure no trace was left." Amir clenched his fists. "Do you have proof?" "Not everything. Just fragments. Names. Dates. Phrases written in the dark, heard behind doors. But I know where to look. And I know who helps him." The prince took a step back. He looked toward the pond, where the flowers floated in gentle rhythm, as if the world weren't on the brink of unraveling. Then he looked back at her. "This is bigger than I imagined. If you're telling the truth, you're risking everything. He'll try to silence you." "He already has," she replied. "Every day I pretended to have no voice was for survival. But I don't want to survive anymore. I want justice." Elif's voice, broken but brave, struck Amir like a promise he could not ignore. For a moment he was no prince, no heir. He was simply a man looking at a woman who stood before him, stripped of protection, armed only with her truth. "I won't let them touch you," he said at last. "I swear it." Elif closed her eyes. For the first time in years she felt like she could breathe. But the wind, ever treacherous, carried her words farther than expected. That same night, from a side gallery, a pair of eyes watched from the shadows. one of Halil Pasha's trusted men, assigned to track the prince's movements. Though he hadn't heard the full exchange, he had seen enough to know something was brewing. When the vizier was informed, his expression didn't change. He continued pouring himself a cup of bitter coffee with the same calm precision. But his orders were immediate. Prepare the subtlest dose. Nothing quick. Nothing obvious. Make it look like a passing fever. The order was sent to the harem's kitchen. No one questioned it. No one suspected. A nightly infusion, offered politely, was placed on the tray bound for Elif's room. She drank it without a second thought. By dawn, the trembling began. Her usually nimble body turned sluggish. Her skin, hot to the touch, poured sweat uncontrollably. Fever consumed her mind like a thick fog. She collapsed onto her bed, voiceless, directionless, strengthless. It was a servant who found her, unconscious among damp sheets. Amir was notified immediately. He entered the chamber like a storm. He saw her pale, lips parched, eyes half shut. He called her name, but she did not answer. He knelt beside her and took her hand. Her pulse was faint, as if life was slipping away in whispers. "No," he said quietly with a rage that burned. "Not now." He ordered the best physician to be summoned. He ordered the doors sealed. No one in. No one out. Hours later, with the fever still unbroken, Amir stormed into the divan hall. Before the members of the council, with the Sultan present, he told his story. He spoke of the documents, the poison, the disappearances. He named Halil Pasha. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't beg for mercy. The Sultan, weary, looked at him in disbelief. "These are grave accusations," he said in a fading voice. "And you bring no clear proof. Words are not enough to bring down a pillar of the empire." Halil Pasha, standing nearby, smiled serenely. "I understand the prince's grief," he said. "He lost his brother, and now this young woman falls ill. It's only natural to seek someone to blame. But nothing said here is grounded in fact." Amir's eyes flared with fury. "I'm not finished." But the Sultan raised his hand. "Enough. The empire cannot afford internal divisions at this time. What has been said here shall remain within these walls, until real evidence is presented." The session was closed. Amir left with his jaw clenched. He knew he had exposed himself. That Halil would now watch him more closely. But he had no regrets. He returned to Elif's side. He sat beside her and took her hand with a tenderness he had never shown before. "Hold on," he whispered. "Don't take from me the only truth I still have to fight for." Elif, half dreaming, barely moved her lips. And in that faint gesture, Amir knew there was still hope. The poison had not silenced her story. It had only delayed it. And the web of power surrounding them would not smother the truth, because she was still breathing. The sun had barely risen over the domes of Istanbul when the first rays of light filtered through the latticework of the palace's western wing. Elif, lying on a simple bed, breathed slowly. Her skin still bore the traces of fever, and her dry lips could scarcely form words. But her eyes were no longer lost. They had regained that old spark, that fire born from the depths of one who has decided to stay silent no longer. Amir had remained by her side for 2 nights, without removing his kaftan, without sleep, without allowing anyone else to care for her. He had watched her hover between life and death, and in that silent struggle, something within him broke. He was no longer just a prince. He was a man marked by the presence of a woman who, without intending to, had transformed him. When Elif opened her eyes fully, she searched for his gaze. She didn't speak. She simply reached a trembling hand toward the side of the bed, where, wrapped in cloth embroidered by Hadisi, lay her most valuable secret. Amir took it carefully. It was a worn notebook, the kind scribes dismissed as too ordinary. But in its pages, written in restrained handwriting, rested years of invisible truths. Elif didn't need to speak. Amir understood. He brushed his fingers over the cover and tucked it inside his tunic. A few hours later, the Imperial Divan Hall was summoned for an urgent meeting. The council members, still surprised by the prince's persistence, gathered around the Sultan, who sat on his throne with a weary expression and severe gaze. Halil Pasha, as usual, was dressed in black, his turban perfectly fitted and his ebony cane in his right hand. His expression was that of a man long accustomed to weathering storms without flinching. Amir entered with a firm step. He wore no jewels, no ceremonial robes. But his mere presence was enough to silence the hall. "Father," he said in a clear voice, "I have brought the proof you demanded." All eyes turned to him. Halil did not move. Amir approached the central platform and placed the notebook on a velvet cushion. The head scribe opened it delicately. The first pages spoke of nights, of whispered words, of names mentioned in secret. Halil was cited more than once. His influence within the harem's corridors, his meetings with minor council members, coded orders to alter the contents of jars in the imperial pharmacy. Everything was there, with dates, with details, with precision. The vizier's expression did not change. "What sort of proof is this?" he asked softly. "Words written by a woman. A concubine. A mute who suddenly can speak?" A murmur spread through the room. The Sultan raised his hand for silence. "Who wrote this?" he asked in a grave tone. "A woman who pretended silence to stay alive," Amir replied. "A woman who saw what no one else wanted to see. A woman you all ignored while treason was taking root beneath your very noses." The atmosphere grew tense. Some council members glanced at one another. The prince's tone left no room for doubt. "And what do you propose?" the Sultan asked, narrowing his eyes. "That a full investigation be launched," Amir said. "That Halil Pasha answer for every name, every death, every disappearance. That the trial against Bekir Yilmaz be reopened, my former mentor and Elif's father, whose honor was trampled by the ambition of the man who now sits among you." It was then that Halil stepped forward. His dark eyes no longer feigned serenity. His voice, low at first, rose like the roar of a wounded beast. "This is nothing but theater, staged by a prince in love with a servant," he exclaimed. "Since when do we let a heart cloud the judgment of an heir? Since when does a notebook written by a concubine suffice to stain the name of a vizier?" The accusation struck like a spear at the center of the hall. All eyes turned to Amir. The Sultan watched him closely, as if trying to read in his eyes the truth that words did not say. "Is it true?" asked the sovereign. "Are you involved with this woman?" Amir did not hesitate. "Yes. I have protected her. And I will continue to do so. Not because I am in love," he said, raising his voice with dignity, "but because she is the only one who has told the truth." The hall erupted into murmurs and gasps. Some council members lowered their heads. Others could not hide their discomfort. Just then, a servant burst into the room, pale, his face contorted. "He tried to flee," he cried. Halil Pasha was caught at the secret archives gate by the south wing guards. Silence fell over the room. The Sultan rose from his throne with painful slowness. "Have him held in the dungeons until further notice," he said. But this is not over. Halil was taken from the hall with his head held high, but the usual arrogance had vanished. For the first time, fear showed in his eyes. Hours later, when word spread through the harem, Elif was summoned to the smaller audience chamber. There, before several council members and under the Sultan's impassive gaze, she was formally accused of lying about her muteness, of manipulating the prince, and of inciting an unprecedented scandal. The verdict was harsh. "Your name will be recorded as that of a woman who betrayed the rules of the harem," said the chief scribe. "You may keep your life but not your dignity." Elif did not cry. She did not beg for mercy. She stood tall, back straight, eyes damp but steady. When Amir heard the verdict, he did not wait for the council's permission. He walked to her, took her hand and turned to the Sultan. "If protecting her costs me the throne, I renounce it." The old sovereign watched him for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. "Go," he said. "But know what you are giving up." Amir bowed his head and left the chamber without looking back. With Elif at his side, he walked through the palace halls, under the stunned gaze of courtiers, concubines and servants. He spoke no word. He simply walked. That same night, a carriage with no escort departed the palace through the western gate. Inside, Amir held Elif's hand with quiet strength. Miles away in the dungeons, Hadisi Kalfa was secretly released. A simple cart took her to a monastery on the outskirts, where forgotten women found peace. And in the towers of Topkapi, the moon shone once more, a silent witness to those who dared to love and to speak the truth. The wind blew gently over the Bosphorus coast, carrying with it the salty scent of the sea and the murmur of waves softly striking the stone walls of an old country house. The place, hidden among cypresses and wild vineyards, was not marked on any official map of the empire. It belonged to a forgotten branch of the royal family, abandoned for years and now brought back to life by the will of a prince who had renounced everything, except the truth. Amir had turned that secluded corner into his refuge. He no longer wore tunics embroidered with gold thread, nor was he surrounded by advisors or shielded by escorts. Yet his bearing remained unchanged. He was still the same man who, even without a crown, commanded respect with a single glance. His days began before dawn, walking silently through the olive groves while the sun still hid behind the hills. Elif, still recovering, found solace in one of the brightest rooms of the house, where the windows opened directly onto the garden. The local doctors, discreet and loyal, had treated her body with ointments and remedies, but it was Amir's constant care that brought peace to her spirit. As she regained her strength, Elif began practicing something she had feared for years, even in solitude: reading aloud. At first her voice was weak, fragmented, as if each word passed through a tunnel of fear. But day by day her tone began to take shape, gaining rhythm and warmth. She started reading alone, in a soft voice, books of history, poetry, forgotten manuscripts that Amir would bring back from his visits to the nearby monastery. Then one afternoon, as the sky turned a soft shade of pink, Amir sat across from her. He didn't ask her to read. He simply opened a book and placed it between them on the table. Elif understood. With trembling hands she began to read aloud. Her voice, shaky at first, grew steady as she read. Amir listened in silence, eyes closed, hands clasped. Each reading was an offering. Each word a rebuilding. It was a simple act, but an intimate one. In that quiet room with no witnesses, two souls were healing each other. Amir, far from resigning himself to his new condition, kept his determination alive. From his desk, beside the library he had restored himself, he wrote letters each night. Letters addressed to intellectuals, old allies, judges of conscience, and clerics with long memories. He no longer signed them as prince but as a citizen of the empire. With elegance and evidence, he denounced the abuse of power, the corruption of the council, and the manipulation of justice. "I'm not writing out of vengeance," he told Elif one night as she served him herbal tea. "I'm writing so that what happened to us will never happen again." She looked at him for a long time without speaking, her eyes damp, her heart trembling. Then in a soft voice she said just one sentence. "I'm not alone anymore." Amir said nothing. He simply brought his hand close to hers. He didn't take it. He didn't kiss it. He just brushed it lightly with his fingertips, as if that simple gesture could seal a promise without words. But the calm of their exile did not go unnoticed for long. The letters began circulating through Istanbul's libraries and cafes, first whispered, then boldly. Poets spoke Amir's name as though invoking a fallen hero. Students copied his writings onto pages hidden between prayer books. Market women whispered about the girl who had feigned muteness to survive the palace and who was now being cared for by a prince who had given up everything for her. The legend grew with each passing day. The prince who gave it all up for a woman without a voice, they said in taverns, kitchens, and secret gardens. When Elif heard of it, a shiver ran through her. She had never sought to become a symbol. She had never wanted to become part of history. But now she was, and there was no turning back. Amir knew this. That's why he doubled his caution. He ordered the estate's doors to be reinforced. He avoided stepping beyond the boundaries of the land. He trusted only two messengers, the sons of once loyal soldiers, who carried his writings in wooden chests, protected by false seals and encrypted text. One afternoon, as Elif was arranging books in the library, Amir entered without warning. She looked at him, her hands full of scrolls. "What's wrong?" she asked in a faint voice. He didn't reply at first. He approached her, took one of the scrolls from her hand and gently rolled it up. Then he met her gaze. "They're beginning to fear me," he said. "That means we're close." Elif blinked, not fully understanding. "Close to what?" "To showing them that power doesn't always belong to those who shout the loudest, but to those who dare to speak even after staying silent for too long." That night, Elif read aloud again. But this time, not a poem or a treatise. She read her own story. Page by page, word by word, she read the memories she had written in her notebook during the years of silence. She read without hesitation, without hiding the tears that occasionally fell. Amir listened in silence, with his soul open and his heart clenched. When she finished, she closed the notebook with steady hands. "I'm not the same woman who entered the palace," she said. "And you are no longer the man who left it." Amir nodded. His eyes gleamed with restrained emotion, like a river about to overflow. "I don't know what lies ahead," he murmured. "But I know this, I wouldn't change a single decision if in the end, I still have you by my side." Elif didn't respond. But in her eyes, in her silence, in the way she placed her hand over Amir's heart, the whole truth was spoken. Outside, the Bosphorus wind continued to blow. And in the stillness of that hidden house, two wounded hearts began to build, without promises or crowns, the true price of freedom. The morning mist cloaked the domes of the Topkapi Palace with a melancholic density, as if the very sky sensed that the course of the empire's history was about to change. The gardens, silent, seemed to hold their breath. It had been weeks since the Sultan last appeared in public. It was said his health was deteriorating rapidly, and that the walls of the harem and the divan no longer echoed with his firm commands, but only with the murmurs of his physicians and the prayers of his most loyal servants. Meanwhile, in the streets of Istanbul, conversations multiplied. Some claimed that Grand Vizier Halil Pasha would be reinstated. Others said Emir was preparing a silent rebellion from exile. But what spread most widely, like gunpowder among scrolls, was a name that had meant nothing until recently: Elif, the woman who had pretended to be mute. The woman who had written what no one else dared to speak. It was in that atmosphere, between illness and rumors, that the Imperial Council received a formal petition for review. It did not come from Emir. It did not come from the court. It came from the mounting pressure of intellectuals, academics, and forgotten judges who, inspired by Emir's letters, demanded justice for the one who had been punished for writing when her voice was denied. The petition, signed by more than a dozen distinguished men and a handful of women of noble lineage, arrived with such force it could not be ignored. The council was compelled to convene, for the first time in months, with only one item on the agenda: Elif's case. That was when a messenger, mounted on a white horse and covered in the dust of northern roads, arrived at Emir's retreat. He carried a royal seal. The prince received him on the terrace where he often read with Elif at sunset. Upon opening the letter, he recognized the handwriting of the grand scribe. The council was summoning him. Not as a prince. Not as heir. But as a witness. Emir remained silent for several minutes. Then he looked toward Elif, who stood in the doorway with a book in her hands. "It's time," he said, without needing to explain anything further. The return to the palace was far from grand. Emir traveled with a small escort, no banners, no proclamations. But his presence did not go unnoticed. As he passed through the gates of the imperial complex, the eyes of servants and guards lifted as if they had seen a ghost. He was no longer the proud young prince who once walked those corridors. He was a man who had learned the price of truth, and had chosen to pay it with dignity. The council met in a discreet chamber, far from the noise of the divan. The elder members, some wary, others curious, received Emir with a mixture of suspicion and respect. No one dared call him prince. But all listened as he began to speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not wave documents. He recounted the events that had led him to leave the court with calm precision. He detailed the contents of Elif's notebook, the evidence it held, the names it implicated. But he did not stop there. He presented new testimonies: 2 former scribes from the imperial apothecary, now retired, who admitted to having received orders from Halil Pasha to alter records. He also spoke of other names, minor officials who had disappeared shortly after cooperating with the investigation. The council listened with growing attention. It wasn't Emir's eloquence that moved them. It was his conviction, his calm, his unwavering resolve, of a man who sought not revenge but justice. But what tipped the scales wasn't the voice of the former prince. Days earlier, a letter had arrived at the palace, sealed with the emblem of the monastery in the hills of Beykoz. It was signed by Hadisi Kalfa. The elderly woman from her retreat had chosen to break her vow of silence. The letter, written with a trembling yet steady hand, detailed the record she had seen altered, the threats she had received, and the exact day she realized Elif would be used as a pawn in a ruthless political game. She also confirmed the innocence of Elif's father, a government official who had served the empire faithfully until his downfall, orchestrated by Halil's ambition. The council fell silent. The grand scribe read the letter aloud. At its conclusion, no one raised their voice in dissent. It was an elderly judge, with a white beard and tearful eyes, who asked to speak. "If we do not correct this wrong," he said with a trembling voice, "we will have condemned not just one woman, but the memory of the empire itself." The vote was swift. Elif's name would be cleared. Her notebook preserved as an official document. And her role acknowledged as key in exposing one of the darkest conspiracies the Ottoman court had seen in decades. A message was then sent to the Sultan's bedside, where the aging monarch, consumed by fever and weakness, signed one final decree. Elif, daughter of Bekir Yilmaz, would be named imperial librarian. A woman without title, without noble lineage, without a voice for years, would assume a position never before held by someone like her. When Emir returned to the retreat and gave her the news, Elif did not cry. She simply sat beside him, took his hand, and with a voice steady, as though she had spent years preparing for this moment, said, "I never sought a place. I only wanted the truth to have won. That night, for the first time in weeks, the moon shone clearly over the waters of the Bosphorus. And in the old house where love had found refuge, two hearts understood that the most important judgment was not the empire's, but the one they had each overcome within themselves. The sun fell gently over the rooftops of Istanbul, filtering its golden light through the marble columns of the eastern wing of the Topkapi Palace. The breeze, scented with jasmine and apricots, caressed the open drapes of the grand imperial library, where the sounds were no longer fearful whispers, but the harmonious rustle of pages and the respectful murmur of apprentices wandering the halls in search of knowledge. There, at the center of that sanctuary of wisdom, stood Elif. She wore an ivory linen tunic with fine dark blue silk embroidery, long sleeves, and a velvet belt cinched with discreet elegance. Her hair, gathered in a low bun, was adorned with a single silver comb that had belonged to her mother. She no longer walked in silence to go unnoticed. Her steps were steady, and her presence commanded respect. Around her, young scholars copied ancient manuscripts and catalogued volumes brought from Alexandria, Damascus, and Baghdad. The library, once empty and neglected, now breathed with life. Elif didn't just oversee it, she had transformed it. Under her direction, codices had been restored, forgotten works translated, and the first reading room for women of the court opened. It was an unprecedented achievement. A woman without noble blood, without a family name of lineage, occupying a position that for centuries had been reserved for men of prestige. But no one dared question it, because no one could deny that Elif had returned dignity to knowledge, and to the empire, a history worth preserving. Seated by one of the windows in a quiet corner, Amir watched her. He no longer wore the red of the air nor bore the rings with his family's seal. His dark-toned kaftan was simple yet immaculate. His hair, shorter now, revealed some graying at the temples. Yet his bearing remained regal, even in simplicity. Amir needed no title to inspire respect. His calm gaze, his composed silence, and the way he inclined his head whenever Elif passed by were enough. No words were needed between them. Theirs were spoken through gestures, shared glances, books opened at night and read aloud while the rest of the palace slept. That day, however, was unlike any other. The rumor had spread through the halls since early morning. There would be a ceremony. Brief, without fanfare, but meaningful. The Sultan's health, though fragile, still allowed him to make decisions that would be remembered. And one of them, perhaps the final act of his long reign, was to legitimize what the people already whispered in secret: the union of Elif and Amir. The palace's inner gardens, surrounded by orange trees and ponds, were adorned with paper lanterns, Persian rugs laid between the fountains, and white flowers brought from the Anatolian interior. There were no trumpets, no procession of courtiers. Only the closest few, those who had known the story from its shadows. When Elif appeared, walking arm in arm with an elderly servant from the harem, one of the few still alive to tell how it all began, the murmur of the guests faded into reverent silence. Amir waited at the base of the marble pavilion. In his hand he held a simple ring, forged in silver and inscribed with Ottoman calligraphy that read, "In your voice, my peace." The Sultan, pale but lucid, observed from a divan draped in silk, attended by his personal physician. His signature had already been affixed to the decree. But he wished to be present, to see with his own eyes what had once been impossible for past generations. A love born of suffering, blossomed in truth and consecrated not by privilege but by merit. When Elif began to speak, the air seemed to still. It wasn't a long speech. She carried no papers, no notes. Only her voice, clear and firm, rose above the silence. She spoke of the value of words, the power of knowledge, and the duty of those who have suffered in silence to rise and be a beacon for those who still remain quiet. "They called me mute to strip me of power," she said. "But now I know that power does not lie in the voice, but in what one does with it once it is finally freed." The applause was not thunderous. It was profound. Like a held-back wave finally finding the shore. The guests stood one by one. Even those who had once doubted her. Even those who had, in the past, avoided looking at the silent servant who once poured wine during harem feasts. Amir approached her. He did not speak. He simply kissed her forehead, with a tenderness worth more than 1,000 promises. And thus, in a simple ceremony, beneath the gaze of orange trees and with history as witness, what began as an act of survival ended as a luminous victory. The people, upon hearing of their union, lit candles that night. In the neighborhoods of Istanbul, women embroidered handkerchiefs with Elif's name in golden thread. In the markets, poets recited verses inspired by her story. On the palace walls, Young apprentices copied her speech to memorize it. And in the imperial library, upon a carved wooden lectern, her notebook was placed. Not as evidence, not as an accusation, but as a living memory that sometimes true love is not born in a word, but it is consecrated through one. And Elif, the one who had been a slave, mute and accused, entered the chronicles of the empire forever. Not as a concubine, not as the wife of a prince, but as the woman who spoke when no one dared, and who loved when love seemed impossible. Time, silent as a patient scribe, had continued to trace its lines upon the faces and walls of the empire. 10 springs had passed since that afternoon when Elif, with a voice trembling yet firm, delivered her first public speech beneath the orange trees of the palace. Much had changed since then, and much had remained the same. The imperial library still stood, more alive than ever. Its eastern wing now bore the name Elif Yilmaz, and there, on a plaque of blue marble, one could read a simple inscription, where silence became word and word memory. It was the most visited room by young female readers, who crossed the palace gardens each day with books in their arms and faces alight with questions. Elif, though no longer overseeing every corner, remained present. She walked the halls with her hair covered by a white linen veil, her steps unhurried, her gaze serene. Silver threads had settled gently in her braids, and a deeper line etched the corner of her lips. But her eyes, those eyes, still spoke with the same intensity as before. They observed everything with that blend of caution and fire that had once intrigued a prince. Amir at her side still held himself tall. He was no longer called prince. He was simply Amir, the man who gave up the court for love. Over the years his figure became legend. Many young men sought his counsel, not because of his bloodline but because of his story. He never again held office. But every decision made by the new council of sages seemed to carry the echo of his thoughts. They lived in a modest home near the sea, not far from the palace, surrounded by books, almond trees and memories. Each morning, Elif brewed cardamom coffee and served it in the same ceramic cups once used by Hadisi Kalfa, whose name was spoken softly with gratitude. The old woman had passed peacefully at the monastery, but her final letter, the one that saved Elif, was framed beside the desk where Amir wrote his memoirs. They had a son. His name was Salim, after the lost brother. He was a curious child with dark hair and an intelligent gaze. Though many expected he would one day enter palace service, his parents raised him far from ambition. He learned to read in the library courtyards, to observe in silence, to ask questions with humility. Elif taught him that a just word written at the right time could change the course of a life. Amir taught him that the truest power is the one that needs no proclamation. In society, the echoes of Elif and Amir's story brought about slow but steady change. School doors opened to more women. Female scribes began to have a voice in official records. Past wrongs were acknowledged. And though the court remained a world of secrets and delicate balances, no one dared say anymore that a woman without title couldn't change the fate of the empire. As for Halil Pasha, his name was erased from official records. He spent his final years confined to a guarded residence, surrounded by the same silences he had once imposed on others. He died without glory and his grave bore no flowers. Each spring Elif and Amir walked together to the hill where young Salim rested. There they placed a white flower like the one Elif had secretly left the night of his death. Little Salim, holding his mother's hand, asked each year about his uncle, and she always gave the same reply. He was a pure heart in a world still learning how to listen. That love, born amid mistrust and the shadows of the harem, had endured wars, intrigues, and silence. It was not perfect, but it was true. And over time it did not fade. It took root, became legacy, became example. Because love born of truth and nurtured by respect does not die. It becomes history. And in the history of the empire, among sultans and conquests, was forever engraved the name of a woman who pretended to be mute to survive, and ended up teaching the world how to listen. There are stories not only heard, but felt. Stories that are born in the darkest corners of the soul, where all seems lost, yet somehow bloom with the strength of truth, of courage, and of love. The story of Elif and Amir is not merely a romance set in the harem of the Ottoman Empire. It is a reminder that even in the most unjust of places, a single voice, even silenced, can change everything. That true love is not built on hollow promises, but on quiet gestures, on loyalties that withstand exile, on brave choices that leave an everlasting mark. And you, who made it to the end, what did you learn from this story? What moment touched your heart? Tell me in the comments, because your voice is also part of this journey. If you made it to the end, write the word voice in the comments. That way I'll know you are one of those who feel deeply and support this channel. You can't imagine how much it helps to know these stories resonate with people like you. And if this tale moved you, don't leave without watching the other stories linked here. They all carry the same spirit of emotion, elegance, and soul that you found today. Thank you for joining me. And remember, never underestimate the power of a single word, spoken at the right moment. See you in the next story.